What was the most awkward thing you witnessed in a school classroom? Story 1. In a senior thesis class in college, we had a pretty open assignment. Basically, we had all semester to prepare a 30-page paper and a 20-minute presentation. It was a class meant to prepare you for graduate school. So, this kind of quiet guy did his about anime and the difference between the cartoons in the Western world versus the serious nature of some anime films. It was a great presentation. He was a little shy, but you could tell he was very intelligent and really understood the subject matter. I was really enjoying the presentation, and about 10 or 12 minutes into the presentation, he mentioned something about the laws of prohibiting explicit films in Japan that feature real people. He then went on to the next slide, which had a mildly frisky image of like a scantily clad anime girl, and he explained anime filled the gap created by the law. The image was okay, we were an audience of senior liberal arts majors, and we were mature about it. And then it got intense really quick. The next slide was an anime woman giving a serious BJ, slobber and all. Some of the people in the class gasped, someone said, "Wow, that's intense." I looked at our professor, who had some big eyes, but let him keep going. I figured, okay, let's move on and get behind this. Maybe he will recover, and the next slide was a video of a hardcore anime adult film, and he continues with 4 or 5 slides of some graphic anime stuff like octopus stuff and all kinds of stuff. By the time the presentation was over, I had never seen a classroom full of more confused people. Some people were clearly disgusted, some thought it was hilarious, and some people just looked in shock. The professor said, "Well, that was quite graphic. You may want to add a disclaimer to content of that nature in the future before you present it to an audience." Yeah, I get the disclaimer piece, but what is really the point? Like, do you think that adding a disclaimer is really going to make people look away or walk out of the presentation? It's less of a disclaimer and actually more of a reminder to pay special attention because you're about to see some seriously interesting and messed up stuff. On a side note, I actually had no idea about the history of anime that was mentioned. That is actually pretty interesting and makes total sense. When you put up restrictions, friskiness always finds a way. Story 2. My high school economics class. A girl was called to the office with her things rather suddenly. About 12 minutes later, she comes bursting into the room and yells, "My dad just passed." The teacher immediately went to try to console her as she was justifiably distressed. Everyone in the room was in complete shock. She then yelled at the teacher to get off of her and threw her arm back and started hysterically darting around the room. Eventually, her family member came to the room to get her, and we could hear her sobbing down the hall. It was the craziest, most heart-wrenching thing I had ever seen in a class. The second most awkward thing involved the same girl about a year earlier. She nearly tried to fight our English and lit teacher while he was dressed in a formal kilt and jacket. I don't remember why. She had to be escorted out by security. Story 3. I don't know if this is awkward or more uncomfortably sad. When I was in middle school, pretty tight-knit, a kid passed on Saturday. I had a couple classes with him, but didn't know him that well. Well, on Monday, my second class of the day had a sub, and the kid who died happened to be in that class. I guess no one cued the sub in because she called his name during attendance. It was deafeningly silent and felt like the air was slowly being sucked out of the room. After a second or two, she called his name again, and several people burst into sobs and ran from the room. And then I hear somebody whisper, "He passed." Another teacher I had was absent that day too. I think he had some prior engagement as opposed to randomly taking a sick day. And the next day when he came back, the boy that passed was also in his class. He was apologizing profusely for not being there for us and everything. At some point during his little speech, he started crying and slammed his fist down on the desk. It was so sad. He truly felt awful for not being there that day. Story 4. I was in the 9th grade and there was a girl in my classroom who broke both of her arms. So she had them in a cast that held her arms above her waist. Now this girl wasn't the most popular and she was best friends with another girl who was equally awkward as she was. I will never forget when my best friend raised her hand to get the attention of the teacher. The teacher called on her best friend and she asked if she and her broken-armed friend could use the restroom together. And the teacher asks, "Why do you need to go together?" She replies just like this, I have to unzip and take off her pants." Looking back, I understand now that she just wanted to help her friend use the restroom, but imagine being in 9th grade and you hear this. Everyone in the classroom was silent, and then one kid started laughing, and then everyone started laughing. And that is how the lesbian rumors started about the two. High school can be a crazy ride. There was also the implication of what the friend might be also helping with if the cast girl needs to go number 2, right? I mean, how are you supposed to wipe and take care of things down there? If that is the case, that is a pretty amazing friend, at least. I'm honestly surprised why this student is even back in school so early, because if you can't even move your arm, should you really be back in school? Story 5. There was this couple in my math class who had broken up. The guy sat behind the girl for the rest of the year. Now one day, John goes to the washroom, and while he is out, some guy who sits close to him opens his bag and quietly starts pulling out its contents, and very quietly places them on his desk. There's the usual things. Then there's a bottle of hand lotion, some 8x10 glosses of his ex, some other pictures of her, and those get piled on the desk too. John returns, sees the items on the desk, and loses his mind, starts swearing. Now everybody is looking over, including his ex, who says, "What the F? I thought you said you gave all those back." Everyone sees what she's talking about, and it was very uncomfortable. Story 6. This mentally handicapped kid in my class named Mark was always super infatuated with this really smart, nice girl in our class. He would always talk about how he was going to make her his girlfriend, and she was always just too nice to him to tell him it wasn't going to happen. Now, this went on for years. Anyways, one day someone thought it would be funny to tell Mark I was dating the love of his life. I wasn't. But Mark flipped his stuff and found me in the hallway and pushed me up against the gigantic topographical plaster map of Alberta. The Rocky Mountains cut into my back as he pushed me harder into it and yelled into my face while crying about how Tessa was his girlfriend and I need to leave her alone. I told him I wasn't dating her, and he ran off crying. Poor guy. Story 7. It wasn't me, but the stories were everywhere. In public grade school, our superintendent made a surprise visit and decided to sit on a random teacher's class. She sat in the back to watch, and these two boys in the front of her were whispering to each other. Now, she leaned in and whispered that they should pay attention. They did, but 2 or 3 minutes later, they started again. This apparently happened several more iterations before the SI leaned forward and slammed their heads together and shouted, "Pay the F attention to your teacher!" Fired before the end of the day. I wonder what drives someone to have a career as a superintendent, only for them to just snap kind of randomly like that. This person has obviously seen kids goof off before and not pay attention in class, so what the heck happened here? Maybe the superintendent has been watching those two for a while and they have some sort of history. In the comments, does anyone have a story of seeing a school staff member just absolutely snap at a student? Story 8. Back in the 6th grade, I had a kid who always caused trouble and tried to be the center of attention all the time. Well, this kid had a weird way of flirting with girls, whether it was to shoot spitballs at them or pour water on them. One day, he told all his friends that he will literally crap his pants during class in order to show off to the girls. During class, we were giggling, and it began to smell like actual crap. Everyone looks at him because he was sitting in the back of the class, and he stands up while laughing and says, "Teacher, I need to go to the bathroom." I accidentally crap my pants. With crap running down his legs, he walks out of the class laughing hysterically as if he had just won a Nobel Prize or something. By the way, he was never popular with the girls. Story 9. We had a math teacher that was a bit effeminate, so naturally students spread the rumor that he was gay. We had some of those really long rulers in the classroom, and one day, a ruler toppled over neatly into the crack of his butt as he was leaning down to help a student. He let out a surprised "ooh" sound. We laughed, and the poor guy was subjected to even more rumors and jokes. We also had a substitute teacher who we referred to as Pierce Brosnan. He looked just like the actor, with a huge scar on his face. He was notoriously known for smelling like chicken tikka. Kids in class would drive him crazy to the point where he'd slam his hands on the desk and yell, "Shut up!" at the top of his lungs. Of course, this only encouraged kids to tease him more. Oh, and another one, we had this really awesome French teacher. He'd bring in French candy, tell us stories about when he was young, and all around was just a great teacher, aside from his temper. There was this jerk of a kid in my class who would wind up the whole class, and one day, our teacher had enough of it. He threw his whiteboard pen on the floor as hard as he could, slowly walked up to the kid, maintaining eye contact the entire time, and verbally tore him to shreds. The kid was crying and red-faced, complete with snot trails as he was sent out of the room. Nobody dared breathe as our teacher slowly walked back towards the pen he had thrown. He picked it up and casually said, "Oops, I broke the pen." The class giggled, and those were some intense minutes. Story 10. We had a new history teacher fresh out of college, and he quickly gained a reputation for being a pushover. He was always notorious for never looking at the class. If this guy was reading to us from the book, we might as well have been smoking or something for all he knew. My class decided to do a little cattle drive where we would all slowly scoot our desks towards him. Being the deviants that we were, We chose the day that he was being evaluated by the principal to do this. It didn't take long before we were literally at his feet. Some of the students even went past him and had their desks against the chalkboard. He never looked up from that book. The principal was not amused. She took him into the hallway and chewed him out so bad the entire school heard. He came back into the classroom, looked at the carnage we had created, loosened his tie, and laughed. Then he sat down at his desk and smoked a cigarette. Yeah, he was fired at the end of the year. Story 11. I was in 6th grade and my father was just diagnosed with cancer. I, not knowing how to deal with it, started acting out a little bit in school. Nothing serious at all, just trying to be the class clown here and there when I was normally quiet. Now, I guess the school thought that it would be good for me to join the basketball team to keep my mind occupied. I was terrible at basketball, but my father asked me to play. And I made the team, I thought. When in reality, it was just to keep me from acting out and to focus on something. I was in gym class with the gym teacher who was notorious for being a jerk. Just someone who most likely wasn't the coolest in high school, so he made it his mission to bully students as a teacher. One day, I did something that didn't coincide with his rules, so he thought it was appropriate to announce, in front of everyone, "Think you're funny, kid? You know the only reason why you made the basketball team is because your father is sick, right?" I was crushed. So embarrassed that here I thought I made the team because I was a good enough baller, and it hit me right there that not only did the whole staff at the school knew, but the whole team was likely aware of my situation and knew that that was the only reason I made the team. I went home upset, but not hysterical. My mom asked me what was wrong, and I told her, and she flipped the F out. Here I was mad at myself for acting out and getting reprimanded, yet I had no clue just how much he'd crossed the line. She called the school and lost it. Nothing happened. It wasn't until years later that I realized how incredibly inappropriate that was of him and how little I did to deserve it. I seriously contemplated going back to the school to see if he was still there and kicking the crap out of him. I let it go, but I tell you one thing, I'm 24 now, and if I saw him on the street somewhere, it'd be most likely to get ugly. What I don't understand is how the heck nothing happened after the mom complained. The school should have fired that teacher on the spot to at least avoid some sort of lawsuit or something, especially since there was a whole group of students that witnessed the incident too. There would be no leg to stand on for that jerk teacher. I'm sure some karma hit that teacher eventually, though, because what comes around goes around. Story 12. I remember a substitute teacher we had for a few days when I was in middle school. She was pretty overweight, and one day she grabbed a chair from an empty desk to help someone else out with their assignment, when suddenly we heard a loud crash. One of the legs on the chair had broken and she was flat on her back. It was hard not to laugh. But what made it even worse is as she was getting up, she ended up farting very loudly. The entire class erupted in a fit of laughter, and she had to leave the classroom because she was so embarrassed. Story 13. In the span of 2nd to 4th grade, there was a boy named William at my school. William was very smart and knew that he was very smart. So much so that if he as much as missed one question on any test, he would have a full-on meltdown. The aforementioned meltdowns were some of the funniest things I'd ever seen, and often resulted in awkwardness. The first incident was when he missed a question on his math test and proceeded to tear his test up and throw it away. Then he cussed out our teacher for being a heartless jerk and picked up a desk and threw it at her. Then he kicked her and stormed out. The next incident was when he missed 3 questions on a history test and he promptly got out of his chair and walked out of the classroom. He didn't come back. When the bell rang, we tried to leave, but the door was jammed shut. William had gone and found a small stick and jammed it into the door in such a way that it jammed it and made it so nobody on the inside could get out. The incident that resulted in his expulsion was when he actually missed 6 questions on a test out of 10, and he went on an absolute rampage. Like, think the Hulk. He flipped over desks, punched every kid he could, threw chairs across the room, and the principal arrived at a prompt chair to the gut, followed by a crazed preteen trying to kick, claw, and bite him. William was entertaining to say the least, but looking back, I realized that he most likely had some sort of mental disorder that caused him to excel in academics, but fail in social and stressful environments. I like to imagine that he's out somewhere, leaving havoc in his wake. Story 14. Stuck in gym after the school went on lockdown because of a planned student walkouts over immigration protests in Los Angeles. Anyways, there was this kid who was really into Naruto. Stocky, ginger, terrible acne, and always playing his hands like he was doing Naruto spells at people. Needless to say, he was not the apex of the social hierarchy. This, however, didn't stop him from pairing up with a girl who was just as, different as he was. So a few hours into the lockdown, teachers started looking and counting kids to make sure that no one went off the reservation, and when they started looking for Naruto Boy, he was under the bleachers with the girl, squeezing each other's zits and eating whatever came out. I'm not really sure how to even respond to this story, really. Like, what compels people to consume each other's zit contents? This bothers me to my core. This can't be a fetish, right? Like, anyone out there heard of anything remotely close to this kind of gross stuff? And sadly, I do find myself weirdly curious as to what this would taste like. And it's gone. Story 15. 7th grade, last week of school. No more teaching, so we're just watching movies. A female teacher in her late 50s was going to retire in the next few years or so. She was very well respected. She had a box of videotapes of movies, and all of them obviously recorded with taped labels on them. Someone chooses one, pops it in the VCR, and it's a DirecTV or some cable menu, and the user is scrolling down while recording. Clicks on a title, and on the screen is the behind view from below shot of a black dude going crazy on a white girl in an adult film. Like, hardcore. Camera is aimed right at his gooch and balls slamming against her. The class lets out a collective laugh, then a sigh of awe. It ran for like 45 seconds before the teacher saw what was happening and turned off the TV. So much cringe because we all knew it had to be her husband that recorded over one of her movies and then placed it in the box. No one ever told any authorities or their parents because we knew it was a terrible thing, but most embarrassing for our teacher that we all loved. Story 16. Okay, so it was senior year of high school and I was taking a pre-calc class. It was my first class and started at 8 a.m., and the teacher was walking us through some problems on the board when she stopped and called on a student with her hand raised. This wasn't just any student, but our valedictorian and head cheerleader. She dressed in the nicest clothes every day and spent probably 2 hours before school doing her hair and makeup. So, she calls on this girl, and the whole class looks to see what she has to say. We look over, and she has her cheeks full of something looking like a chipmunk. All she does is open her mouth to try to speak, and vomit spews from her mouth all over her desk and the back of the guy in front of her. No one says a word. She stands up, sprints to the front of the room, and tries to round the corner to head towards the door, and she slips on her own vomit and falls on her butt as her shoe goes flying across the room. She stands up, faces the class, and looks at us all in complete horror before breaking down in tears and runs out of the room wearing only one shoe. It felt like something out of a TV show. Story 17. I had a chunky male, grade 11 student who decided he was going to lean back on his chair and sit with his feet resting on his desk. When I told him no, he argued with me. And when it finally became clear that this was going nowhere, I phoned the office and told them to expect the student in the office as I was kicking him out of my classroom. The student was so angry that as he left, he tried to slam the classroom door hard. Unfortunately for him, he was so large that he couldn't move fast enough, and rather than getting the loud slam he was looking for, he merely succeeded in slamming the door on his own behind. The entire class broke up in laughter, and I had to tell them not to laugh while myself was holding back my own laughter. You can't fault the teacher or anyone in the class for laughing. Seemed like he had it coming one way or the other. And this seems like a guy who probably isn't well liked by his peers because he is unnecessarily a jerk and brings negative attention into the classroom. There comes a point where being defiant and non-compliant to a teacher is no longer cool and seen as being a rebel, but instead you're just a disruptive dude who is annoying. I do hope the door was okay though.